The old upright piano sat in the corner of the community center, mostly untouched except for the occasional child banging on the keys while waiting for their parents. A thin layer of dust had settled on its dark wood finish, and a few of its ivory keys had yellowed with age. The piano had been donated years ago by someone who no longer had room for it, and since then, it had become more of a decoration than an instrument. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the community center as people filed in for the monthly neighborhood gathering. Outside, the streets glistened under streetlights and umbrellas bobbed up and down as latecomers hurried toward the entrance. Inside, the space buzzed with conversation as neighbors caught up with one another, their voices creating a warm blanket of sound that filled the room. Among them was Lynn, a quiet woman in her 30s who had moved to the neighborhood just 3 months ago. She stood near the refreshment table, a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand, watching the social dynamics unfold around her. Lynn had attended these gatherings since she arrived, hoping to make connections in her new community, but she still felt like an outsider looking in. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, nothing that would make her stand out in the crowd. "You're the new one, right? Moved into the old Henderson place?" a friendly voice asked. Lynn turned to see an older woman with curly gray hair and bright, curious eyes. The woman wore a handmade sweater with a pattern of little cats dancing across it. "Yes, that's me," Lynn replied with a small smile. "I'm Lynn. I'm Rose. Been living here for 42 years now," the woman said proudly. "You picked a good neighborhood, honey. Just need to get you properly introduced to everyone." Before Lynn could respond, Rose had taken her by the elbow and was guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to what felt like every person in the room. Lynn nodded and smiled, trying to remember names and faces, but they all blurred together in a whirl of handshakes and small talk. "And this is Mr. Chen. He runs the community center programs," Rose said, introducing Lynn to a tall man with glasses who was setting up a microphone at the front of the room. "Nice to meet you," Lynn said, extending her hand. "Likewise," Mr. Chen replied with a warm smile. "Rose tells me you just moved here. How are you settling in?" "Still finding my feet," Lynn admitted, "but everyone's been very welcoming." "Good, good. Say, you wouldn't happen to play an instrument, would you? We're always looking for volunteers for our music program." Lynn hesitated, her eyes briefly flicking toward the piano in the corner. "I used to play a little. Nothing special." Rose's eyes lit up. "The piano? Oh, wonderful. You know, that old thing hardly ever gets played properly. Such a shame." "I haven't played in years," Lynn said quickly, suddenly feeling uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm very rusty." "Well, no pressure," Mr. Chen said, though his eyes had followed Lynn's gaze to the piano. "But if you ever feel like it, we'd love to hear you play, even just for fun at one of these gatherings." Lynn nodded politely, relieved when Rose swept her away for more introductions. As the evening wore on, Lynn found herself repeatedly glancing at the piano, memories stirring that she had tried hard to keep buried. The truth was, she hadn't just played a little. Once long ago, the piano had been her whole world. The formal part of the gathering began, with announcements about upcoming events and neighborhood news. People settled into folding chairs, their attention on Mr. Chen as he spoke about a fundraiser for new playground equipment at the local park. "And now," Mr. Chen said, his voice carrying through the microphone, "we usually have a bit of entertainment before we wrap up. Does anyone have a talent they'd like to share tonight?" The room fell quiet. A few people looked at each other, but no one raised their hand. "Come on now, don't be shy," Mr. Chen encouraged. "Someone must have a hidden talent. A song to sing? A poem to recite?" Still nothing. Lynn kept her eyes fixed on her lap, hoping no one would remember her earlier conversation. "Well then," Mr. Chen continued after an awkward pause, "I guess we'll move on to—" "What about you, dear?" Rose suddenly said, turning to Lynn. "Didn't you say you play the piano?" All eyes in the room turned toward Lynn, who felt her cheeks grow hot. "Oh, I don't really," she stammered. "Just a simple tune would be lovely," Rose prompted. "That poor piano needs some attention." Lynn looked around at the expectant faces. She could feel her heart beating faster, a familiar anxiety rising in her chest. She hadn't performed in front of anyone in almost 10 years, not since— "Please?" Rose asked, her eyes kind and encouraging. Lynn took a deep breath. "All right, just something simple." She stood up, legs feeling slightly unsteady as she walked toward the piano. The crowd watched in curious silence as she pulled out the bench and sat down. A thin layer of dust covered the keys and she gently wiped it away with her sleeve. Lynn placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. Just a simple tune, she told herself. Something basic that wouldn't draw too much attention. She began to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the simplest piece she could think of. Her fingers moved stiffly at first, uncertain after so many years away from the keys. The piano was out of tune, some notes tinny and others slightly flat, but it didn't matter. As she played the childish melody, something inside her began to stir. Memories flooded back. Hours spent practicing until her fingers ached. The joy of mastering a difficult passage, the way music had once spoken a language her words never could. Without meaning to, her hands began to move differently. The simple tune transformed, notes cascading and building upon each other as her fingers remembered their old skill. Lynn wasn't aware of the moment when Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star became Chopin's fantasy impromptu. Her hands simply knew the way, flying across the keys in a blur of movement, drawing sounds from the old piano that it hadn't made in years. The complex emotional piece poured out of her, filling the room with its haunting beauty. The community center fell completely silent except for the music. Lynn was lost in it now, eyes closed, body swaying slightly with the rhythm. Every emotion she had suppressed, the loneliness of her new life, the pain of her past, the joy of reconnecting with something she had once loved, all of it found voice in the music. As she played the final notes, letting them hang in the air before gently releasing the keys, Lynn opened her eyes. The room remained silent. She turned slowly to see every person staring at her in amazement. Rose's mouth hung slightly open, and Mr. Chen had taken off his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lynn's face flushed hot with embarrassment. She hadn't meant to play like that, to reveal so much of herself to a room full of strangers. She had forgotten herself completely, and now she felt exposed, vulnerable. "I'm sorry," she said softly, starting to rise from the bench. "I got carried away. Sorry?" Mr. Chen finally spoke, his voice filled with awe. "My dear, that was extraordinary." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and then someone began to clap. Others joined in until the entire room erupted in applause. Lynn sat frozen at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Rose made her way to the piano, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Child, where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Lynn swallowed hard, her hands now folded tightly in her lap. "I studied at the conservatory a long time ago." "A conservatory?" Rose repeated, amazed. "But why did you say you only played a little?" Lynn looked down at the keys, running a finger gently over their worn surface. "Because I haven't played in almost 10 years. "Not really. But why?" someone from the crowd called out. "With talent like that?" Lynn didn't answer right away. The question touched on wounds that had never fully healed, memories she had tried to leave behind when she moved to this new place. "Life happened," she finally said, attempting a small smile. "I had to make other choices." She could see they weren't satisfied with this answer, that they wanted to know more about the quiet woman who had hidden such an extraordinary gift. But Lynn wasn't ready to tell that story. Not yet. Mr. Chen sensed her discomfort and stepped forward. "Well, whatever brought you to us, we're grateful you shared your music tonight. Would it be too much to ask for one more piece?" Lynn hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat back into the anonymity she had carefully maintained. But another part, a part that had been silent for too long, longed to play again, to let the music speak the things she couldn't say. "One more," she agreed softly. As her fingers touched the keys again, Lynn felt something shift inside her, like a door long closed beginning to open. She didn't know what this moment would lead to, or if she was ready to embrace the part of herself she had locked away. But as the first notes filled the room and she saw the rapt faces of her neighbors, Lynn knew that something important had changed. The music had found her again. And this time maybe she wouldn't let it go. Lynn couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the piano keys beneath her fingers and heard the music that had filled the community center. After her second piece, a heartfelt rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the room had erupted in applause again. People she had barely spoken to before had approached her, wanting to know more about her musical background, asking if she taught lessons, wondering if she would play at the upcoming holiday celebration. She had answered their questions vaguely, smiled politely, and left as soon as she could. Now staring at her bedroom ceiling at 3 a.m., Lynn tried to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning inside her. The small apartment she rented was silent, except for the occasional car passing on the wet street outside. Rain continued to fall, creating patterns of shadow and light on her walls as headlights swept by. In the corner of her bedroom stood several unpacked boxes, items she hadn't found places for since moving in 3 months ago. With a sigh, Lynn got out of bed and padded barefoot to the corner. She pulled one particular box from the bottom of the stack, a box she had deliberately left sealed. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, she opened it for the first time since the move. Inside were remnants of her former life. Competition medals, concert programs, old sheet music with her handwritten notes in the margins, and photographs of a younger Lynn in formal concert attire, standing beside famous pianists and instructors. At the bottom of the box lay a folder of newspaper clippings, which she purposely didn't touch. Instead, she lifted out a framed photograph of an older woman sitting at a grand piano, her face turned toward the camera with an expression of quiet pride. Lynn traced the outline of the woman's face with her finger. "I played tonight, Grandma," she whispered to the photo. For the first time in a long time, morning came too quickly. Lynn dragged herself through her work-from-home job as a translator, her mind constantly drifting back to the piano. By mid-afternoon, she had made so many errors that she decided to take a break. She made herself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Rose, whose number Lynn had reluctantly given her the previous night. "Hope you don't mind me texting. Mr. Chen wants to know if you'd consider playing at the children's program next week." "No pressure!" "But you brought such joy last night." Lynn put the phone down without replying. Part of her wanted to say yes, to feel that rush again, to share the music that had once been as natural to her as breathing. But another part, the part that still remembered the weight of expectations, the crushing pressure, the reason she had walked away, hesitated. Her doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Looking through the peephole, she was surprised to see Rose standing there, holding a colorful umbrella and what appeared to be a container of something. Lynn opened the door cautiously. "Rose, how did you know where I live?" The older woman had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Small neighborhood, dear, and I might have asked Mrs. Patel from number 17. She's the unofficial welcoming committee." She held out the container. "I brought you some homemade soup. Thought you might like it on such a rainy day." The gesture was so unexpected and kind that Lynn found herself inviting Rose inside, despite her usual reluctance to let people into her space. "This is nice," Rose said, looking around the sparsely furnished living room. "Still settling in, I see." Lynn took the soup to the kitchen while Rose wandered around, eventually stopping in front of the one decoration Lynn had hung on her wall, a simple painting of a piano bathed in golden light. "Beautiful," Rose commented. "You must really love music." "I used to," Lynn replied, returning with 2 cups of tea. Rose accepted a cup and settled onto the couch. "Used to? How does someone with your talent just stop loving music?" Lynn sat in the armchair across from her, cradling her tea. "It's complicated. Most important things are," Rose said simply. She sipped her tea, her eyes kind but persistent. "I'm a good listener if you ever want to talk about it." Something about Rose's gentle presence made Lynn want to share more than she usually would. Maybe it was the older woman's non-judgmental eyes, or perhaps it was simply time for Lynn to face the past she had been running from. "I started playing when I was 4, Lynn began, her voice soft. "My grandmother taught me first. She had been a concert pianist in her youth before she left her home country. Music was her language in a place where she struggled to be understood." Rose nodded encouragingly. "I was good, naturally good. By the time I was 8, I was winning competitions. By 12, I was being called a prodigy." Lynn's voice took on a bitter edge. "Do you know what happens to children who are called prodigies?" "I imagine it's a heavy word to carry," Rose said. "It becomes your entire identity. My whole life became about the piano. Practice before school, practice after school. Weekends spent at competitions instead of with friends. And I loved it at first. The music, the way it made me feel. Like I could speak in ways words never allowed me to. Lynn paused, memories washing over her. My parents sacrificed everything for my training. We moved so I could study with better teachers. They took second jobs to pay for lessons and competitions. My mother learned to sew so she could make my performance dresses. My father drove me hours to lessons every week. They must have been very proud of you, Rose said. Lynn's eyes clouded. They were, and I was determined not to let them down. By the time I was 17, I was accepted to the most prestigious conservatory in the country. Everyone said I was destined for greatness. She fell silent, staring into her tea. Rose waited patiently, sensing there was more to the story. Then what happened, dear? She finally prompted gently. Lynn took a deep breath. I was in my final year at the conservatory. There was a major competition coming up, the kind that launches careers. I had been preparing for months, barely sleeping. My grandmother had just passed away, but I didn't even take time to properly grieve. The music had to come first. That's what everyone said. She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Rose. The night before the competition, I was practicing late in one of the conservatory's practice rooms. I'd been there for hours, playing the same passages over and over. My hands were cramping, but I ignored it. I had to be perfect. Rose set her cup down, her eyes never leaving Lynn. I felt something snap. Lynn continued, her voice barely above a whisper, not just in my hand, but inside me. The pain was excruciating. I kept trying to play through it, but my fingers wouldn't do what I wanted them to do. She turned back to face Rose, unconsciously rubbing her left wrist. Tendon damage. The doctors said I had pushed too hard for too long. They said with surgery and therapy, I might recover enough to play again, but not at the level I had before. Not as a concert pianist. Oh, my dear, Rose said softly. I'm so sorry. My parents had sacrificed everything for something that would never happen. The pressure, the expectations, it all came crashing down. I couldn't face any of it, not the conservatory, not my teachers, not even the piano itself. Lynn's voice broke slightly, so I walked away. I left the conservatory, changed my major to languages at a different university, and I haven't played, not until last night. Rose was quiet for a moment, absorbing Lynn's story. And your hand? Did you have the surgery? Lynn nodded. Eventually. It healed better than they expected, but by then I had already created a different life for myself, one where I wasn't defined by the piano. And are you happy with that life? Rose asked gently. The question caught Lynn off guard. Was she happy? She had a stable job, a quiet life, but the way she had felt last night, reconnecting with the music that had once been her whole world. I don't know, she admitted. For a long time I thought staying away from music was the only way to move forward. But last night, she trailed off. Rose stood up and took Lynn's hands in her own. Last night you played like someone who has music in their soul. That doesn't go away just because life took an unexpected turn. Lynn felt tears threatening to form. I don't know if I can go back to that world. Who says you have to go back to anything? Rose said, squeezing Lynn's hands. Maybe it's about going forward instead, but taking the music with you this time. On your own terms. Before Lynn could respond, her phone buzzed again. It was another text from Mr. Chen, this time with a link attached. She opened it and gasped. Someone had recorded her playing at the community center and posted it online. The video was titled Unknown Pianist Transforms Simple Tune into Masterpiece. It already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. What is it? Rose asked, concerned by Lynn's expression. Lynn handed her the phone wordlessly. Rose watched the video, her eyes widening. Oh my, she said. It seems the world isn't quite ready to let you go, dear. Lynn sank back into her chair, her mind racing. Her carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling. What if someone from her past saw the video? What if the expectations and pressure came flooding back? But as she watched her own hands moving across the keys on the small screen, Lynn felt something else too. A flicker of the pure joy that music had once brought her, before it became weighed down by expectations and demands. What are you going to do? Rose asked gently. Lynn looked up, a mixture of fear and possibility in her eyes. I don't know yet, but I think I need to figure out what music means to me now. Not what it meant to that girl in the conservatory, but what it could mean to me today. Rose smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes after the pause, dear. Sometimes the silence is just part of the song. The video spread like wildfire. 3 days after Lynn's impromptu performance at the community center, it had over 1 million views. People in comments were asking who she was, where they could hear more of her playing, whether she had albums available. Some even recognized the level of training behind her performance, speculating about her background. "You've become an internet sensation overnight," Rose told her during their daily phone call. After their heart-to-heart, the older woman had appointed herself Lynn's unofficial support system, checking in regularly. "That's exactly what I didn't want," Lynn replied, pacing her small apartment. She had called in sick to work for 2 days, unwilling to face even the virtual world outside her apartment. "Have you read any of the comments?" Rose asked. "People are moved by your playing. One person said they cried listening to you. Another said they were inspired to start playing piano again after years away from it." Lynn paused her pacing. She hadn't allowed herself to look at the comments, afraid of what she might find. "Really?" "Really," Rose confirmed. "Your music touched people. Isn't that what it's supposed to do?" Lynn didn't answer immediately. Once, long ago, that had been exactly what she wanted her music to do, to touch people, to make them feel something. Somewhere along the way, between the competitions and the pressure and the expectations, she had lost sight of that pure purpose. "I suppose," she finally said, "but I still don't know what to do about all this attention." "Well, for starters, you might want to check your email. Mr. Chen said he's been getting messages for you through the community center website." Lynn hadn't even thought about that possibility. After saying goodbye to Rose, she reluctantly opened her laptop and logged into her rarely used personal email account. Sure enough, there were dozens of new messages, many with subject lines referencing her performance. One in particular caught her eye. The subject line read, "I'd know those hands anywhere." The sender's name made her heart stop. Dr. Thomas Way, her former piano professor at the conservatory. Lynn's finger hovered over the delete button. Dr. Way had been both her greatest champion and her harshest critic during her time at the conservatory. He had pushed her relentlessly, believing she was destined for greatness. When she left after her injury, she hadn't even said goodbye to him. After several minutes of internal debate, Lynn finally clicked to open the email. "Dear Lynn," it read, "it has been almost 10 years, but I would recognize your playing anywhere. The video of your performance has been circulating among the music faculty here. Everyone is asking where you've been. What happened to the promising young pianist who disappeared so suddenly? I have respected your privacy all these years, but seeing you play again, with such maturity and emotion, I felt compelled to reach out. Whatever led you away from music, I can see in this performance that music has never left you. If you're open to it, I would very much like to talk. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who love music. My number is still the same. Yours, Thomas Way." Lynn closed her laptop without replying. She walked to the window and stared out at the street below, where ordinary lives were being lived by people who had never experienced the peculiar pressure of being exceptionally good at something from a very young age. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was an unknown number. Lynn almost didn't answer, afraid it might be someone who had somehow tracked her down because of the video. But something made her pick up. "Hello? Is this Lynn?" a woman's voice asked. "Lynn Way?" Lynn hadn't used her full name in years, preferring to go by just Lynn in her new life. "Who's asking?" "My name is Grace Flores. I run the children's music program at Bay Area Hospital. I saw your video and, well, this is going to sound strange, but I think I was meant to find it." Lynn's guard went up immediately. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in—" "Please, just hear me out," Grace interrupted. "Our program brings music to children who are receiving long-term care. Many of them are dealing with serious illnesses, spending weeks or months in hospital rooms. Music is one of the few joys they have." Lynn remained silent, listening. "We had a pianist who volunteered weekly, playing for the children and sometimes giving basic lessons to those who were interested. He passed away last month, and we've been trying to find someone to continue his work. When I saw your video, the way you transformed that simple tune, I just knew you would connect with these kids. I'm not a teacher," Lynn said softly, "and I haven't played regularly in years." "These children don't need a concert pianist or a formal teacher," Grace replied. "They need someone who understands the healing power of music, someone who can bring a little beauty into their difficult lives." Lynn thought about her own relationship with music. how it had once been her greatest joy, then her greatest pain. And now, what, a ghost that haunted her? A lost love, or maybe something that still had the power to heal her, just as this woman believed it could heal those children. Would you at least come see the program? Grace asked when Lynn didn't immediately respond. No commitment. Just come and meet some of the kids, see what we do. Lynn closed her eyes, images from her past flooding her mind, herself as a child at the piano, finding joy in the simplest melodies long before competitions and expectations had complicated everything. When? She heard herself asking. Is tomorrow morning possible? Around 10? Yes, Lynn said, surprising herself with how quickly she agreed. Text me the address. The next morning, Lynn found herself standing outside the children's wing of Bay Area Hospital, trying to gather the courage to go inside. She had spent half the night questioning her decision, wondering if she was ready to face music again in such a direct way. You must be Lynn, a woman said, approaching her with a warm smile. She was tall and slender, with her dark hair in a neat bun. I'm Grace, thank you so much for coming. Lynn nodded, suddenly nervous. I haven't agreed to anything yet. Of course, Grace said, unfazed by Lynn's caution. Come, let me show you around. As they walked through the children's wing, Lynn was struck by how bright and cheerful the hospital tried to make the space. Colorful murals on the walls, playrooms filled with toys, nurses wearing patterned scrubs with cartoon characters. But beneath the cheerful veneer, she could sense the weight of illness and worry that permeated the place. They stopped at a large room with a sign that read, Music and Art Therapy. Inside, several children of various ages were engaged in different activities. Some were drawing, others playing with simple percussion instruments. In the corner sat a small upright piano, not unlike the one at the community center. This is where most of our music activities happen, Grace explained. We have group sessions 3 times a week, plus individual time slots for kids who are too ill to join the groups. As they stood in the doorway, a small girl noticed them and waved enthusiastically. She couldn't have been more than 7, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf, her thin body connected to an IV pole that she pulled along beside her as she approached. Are you the new piano lady? She asked Lynn directly, her eyes bright with hope. Lynn glanced at Grace, unsure how to respond. This is Lynn, Grace said. She's visiting us today to learn about our program. Can you play for us? The little girl asked. Nobody's played the piano since Mr. Joe went to heaven. It's been too quiet. Lynn felt something twist in her chest. I don't know if I... Please? The girl persisted. Just one song? Before Lynn could formulate an excuse, the girl had taken her hand and was pulling her toward the piano. Other children began to notice, some looking up from their activities with interest. This is Lily, Grace said softly. She's been here for 6 months, leukemia. Lynn allowed herself to be led to the piano bench, her heart racing. Lily climbed up beside her, her small body radiating a heat that spoke of fever. What would you like to hear? Lynn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something happy, Lily said. Something that feels like dancing. Lynn placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar smooth surface beneath her fingers. This piano was better maintained than the one at the community center, probably kept in tune for the program. She began with a simple Mozart piece, one that bounced along cheerfully. As she played, more children gathered around the piano. Lynn kept her eyes on the keys at first, afraid to see their reactions. But gradually she allowed herself to look up. What she saw made her breath catch. The children were transfixed. Some swayed to the music, others tapped their feet or hands. A boy in a wheelchair had closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. Lily beside her was doing a seated dance, her upper body moving to the rhythm while her hands mimicked Lynn's on imaginary keys. Lynn transitioned smoothly into another piece, this one more playful. A few nurses had stopped in the doorway, watching with smiles. One was recording on her phone, but for once Lynn didn't mind. When she finished playing, there was a moment of perfect silence before the children erupted in applause and excited chatter. Again. Play another one. Can you teach me to do that? That was awesome. Lily leaned against Lynn's side, looking up at her with eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. Your hands make magic, she said simply. Lynn felt something crack open inside her chest, a wall she had built around her heart years ago when she turned away from music. Playing for these children, Seeing the pure joy on their faces, she remembered what had drawn her to the piano in the first place, long before anyone had called her a prodigy or placed expectations on her. "Would you come back tomorrow?" Lily asked. "Mr. Joe used to come on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Lynn looked at Grace, who was watching the scene with hopeful eyes. "I think," Lynn began, surprising herself with what she was about to say, "I think I might be able to do that." As they left the music room an hour later, after Lynn had played several more pieces and even shown a few interested children some basic notes, Grace touched her arm gently. "You don't have to decide right away," she said, "but I hope you'll consider it. You clearly have a gift not just for music but for connecting with the children." Lynn nodded, her mind racing with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. "I'll think about it." Walking to her car, Lynn noticed her hands were steady, the chronic tension she often felt in her left wrist noticeably absent. For the first time in nearly a decade, she had played without fear, without pressure, without anything but the simple desire to bring joy through music. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "How did it go?" Lynn paused before typing her reply, a small smile forming on her lips. "I think I just remembered why I fell in love with the piano in the first place." 2 months passed. Twice a week, Lynn would leave her apartment and drive to Bay Area Hospital, where a group of eager children awaited her. She had settled into a routine, translating work in the mornings, hospital visits in the afternoons, and increasingly, time at her own piano in the evenings. Yes, her own piano. After 3 weeks of playing on the hospital's upright, Lynn had made a decision that surprised even herself. She had withdrawn a significant portion of her savings and purchased a second-hand baby grand piano that now dominated her small living room. It wasn't the finest instrument, but its warm tone and responsive action had called to her the moment she played it in the shop. "I think this is what they call progress," Rose said one evening as she sat on Lynn's couch, listening to her play. Lynn smiled but continued playing, her fingers dancing through a piece she had composed herself, something simple yet heartfelt, inspired by the children at the hospital. She had started writing music again, small pieces at first, little melodies that came to her while working with the kids. When she finished, Rose applauded enthusiastically. "Beautiful." "Your own composition?" Lynn nodded, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "Just something that came to me after working with Lily last week. She's responding well to her new treatment." "You've become quite attached to those children," Rose observed. "They're teaching me more than I'm teaching them," Lynn admitted. "About courage, about joy in the midst of difficulty, about playing music simply for the love of it." Rose smiled knowingly. "And have you responded to any of those emails yet? The ones from the conservatory?" Lynn's former professor, Dr. Wei, had emailed her several more times since his first message. News of her hospital volunteer work had somehow reached him, and his most recent email had been filled with encouragement about her new path. He had even attached some sheet music he thought might work well with the children. "I sent him a thank you note for the music," Lynn said, closing the piano lid gently. "Nothing more." "And the others?" "The concert hall director? The music therapy program coordinator?" Lynn shook her head. Since the video had gone viral, she had received numerous inquiries, everything from interview requests to performance opportunities to job offers. She had responded to none of them, preferring to focus on her quiet work at the hospital and her gradual reconciliation with music on her own terms. "I'm not ready for all that," she said. "Maybe I never will be." Rose raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. Instead, she reached into her large purse and pulled out a flyer. "Have you seen this? The community center is organizing a benefit concert to raise funds for the children's playground. Mr. Chen asked me to give you this." Lynn took the flyer. "A benefit concert?" "Yes, local musicians, amateur performers, that sort of thing. All proceeds go to the playground fund." Rose paused, watching Lynn's face carefully. "They were hoping you might consider playing." "Just one piece." Lynn stared at the flyer, a familiar anxiety rising in her chest. Playing for sick children in a therapy room was one thing. Performing in a concert, even a small community one, was quite another. "I don't know, Rose," she said, setting the flyer aside. "That's different from what I've been doing, is it?" Rose challenged gently. "You're still sharing your gift, still using music to bring joy and help others." Before Lynn could respond, her phone rang. It was Grace from the hospital. "Lynn," Grace said, her voice tight with emotion. I'm so sorry to bother you after hours, but it's Lily. She's had a setback. The new treatment isn't working as well as we hoped. Lynn's heart sank. How bad is it? She's stable for now, but Grace paused. She's been asking for you. I know it's not your regular day, but is there any chance you could come in tomorrow? She really wants to show you something she's been working on. Of course, Lynn said without hesitation. I'll be there in the morning. After ending the call, Lynn explained the situation to Rose, who squeezed her hand sympathetically. That poor child. She's lucky to have you in her life right now. Lynn shook her head. I'm the lucky one. The next day, Lynn arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The children's ward seemed quieter somehow. The usual buzz of activity subdued. She made her way to Lily's private room, knocking softly on the door. Come in, called a weak voice. Lynn entered to find Lily propped up in bed, looking smaller and paler than the last time Lynn had seen her. An IV dripped medicine into her thin arm, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But when she saw Lynn, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. You came, Lily exclaimed. I wasn't sure if you would, since it's not Tuesday or Thursday. Of course I came, Lynn said, sitting in the chair beside the bed. Grace said you wanted to show me something. Lily nodded excitedly, then looked around conspiratorially before reaching under her pillow and pulling out several sheets of paper. I made this, she said, handing them to Lynn. It's my own song. Lynn looked down at the papers. On them, in wobbly handwriting, were musical notes drawn on uneven staff lines. Some notes had been erased and redrawn. Others had little arrows pointing to them with words like loud or soft written beside them. It was a child's attempt at composing music, untrained, unconventional, but created with obvious care and intention. Nurse Patty helped me with the lines, Lily explained. And I remembered what you showed me about the notes. I've been working on it for weeks. Lynn studied the composition, carefully deciphering the child's notation. There was a simple melody there, surprisingly coherent given Lily's limited musical training. This is wonderful, Lily, she said, genuinely impressed. Would you like me to play it for you? Lily shook her head. I want to play it for you, that's why I asked Grace to call you, but her face fell slightly. The doctor says I can't leave my room today. Too many germs. Lynn glanced around the room. There was no piano here, not even a keyboard. I see. Well, maybe when you're feeling better. No, Lily interrupted, a hint of desperation in her voice. It has to be today. I worked so hard on it. The urgency in the child's tone told Lynn everything she needed to know. Lily was afraid there might not be a when you're feeling better. The realization made Lynn's chest tighten painfully. Let me see what I can do, she said, standing up. I'll be right back. Lynn found Grace at the nurse's station and explained the situation. 20 minutes later, with the help of a kind orderly and a special exception from Lily's doctor, a small electronic keyboard had been brought to Lily's room and set up on a rolling table. It's not a real piano, Lynn apologized as she plugged it in, but it will let us hear your song. Lily beamed, sitting up straighter in her bed. Can you help me over to it? Lynn looked questioningly at the nurse who had accompanied the keyboard, who nodded her approval. Carefully, Lynn helped Lily out of bed, mindful of the IV tubes, and settled her on a chair in front of the keyboard. Lily placed her small fingers on the keys, looking up at Lynn with a mixture of pride and nervousness. It's called My Sunshine Song, she said. I wrote it for you, because you brought the sunshine back when you played for us. Before Lynn could respond to this unexpected dedication, Lily began to play. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, picking out the simple melody she had created. There were wrong notes here and there, moments where she paused to remember what came next. But underlying it all was something genuine and heartfelt, the pure expression of a child's joy and creativity. Lynn watched, tears forming in her eyes. She saw in Lily what she herself had once been, a child finding magic in music, playing not for acclaim or achievement, but simply for the love of creating beauty. When Lily finished, she looked up anxiously. Did you like it? It was beautiful, Lynn said truthfully, wiping away a tear. One of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Lily's face glowed with pride. Really better than Mozart. Lynn laughed softly. Much better because it came from your heart. The nurse discreetly checked her watch. Lily needs her rest now, but perhaps you could come back tomorrow? Lynn nodded, helping Lily back to her bed. As she tucked the blanket around the child, Lily grabbed her hand. "Lynn," she said, suddenly serious, "will you play my song at the concert?" Lynn froze. "What concert?" "The one at the community center." Grace showed me the flyer. She said lots of people are going to play music to help build a new playground. Lily's eyes were wide and pleading. "If you played my song, then everyone would hear it, even if I can't be there." Lynn felt a lump forming in her throat. "Lily, please?" the girl whispered. It would be like a part of me was there too. How could Lynn say no to such a request? Looking into Lily's hopeful face, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said. "I would be honored to play your song." Lily's smile was radiant. "Promise?" "I promise," Lynn said, squeezing the child's hand gently. As Lynn drove home that evening, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had just committed to performing in public for the first time in a decade. The thought still filled her with anxiety, but it was now outweighed by something stronger, a determination to fulfill her promise to Lily, to honor the child's creativity and courage. When she arrived home, Lynn went straight to her piano. She carefully placed Lily's handwritten composition on the music stand and began to play it, working through the child's notation, finding the heart of the simple melody. Over the next hour, she expanded on it, adding harmonies that complemented the original tune without overwhelming it, crafting an arrangement that preserved Lily's creation while elevating it. As the night grew late, Lynn found herself writing feverishly, the music flowing from her in a way it hadn't in years. This wasn't about technical perfection or impressing an audience. This was about connection, about honoring a child's trust and creativity. This was music with purpose. When she finally stopped, exhausted but strangely exhilarated, Lynn realized something had shifted inside her. The wall between herself and her musical past had crumbled a little more. She was no longer simply a former pianist. She was becoming something new, something that incorporated her past but wasn't limited by it. She picked up her phone and, for the first time, replied properly to Dr. Wei's email. "Dear Dr. Wei," she wrote, "I would like to talk, not about where I've been, but about where I might be going. There's a benefit concert at my local community center next weekend. If you're interested, there's someone's composition I'd like you to hear. It's not mine. It belongs to a very special 7-year-old named Lily, and it has taught me more about music than all my years at the conservatory." Lynn hit send before she could change her mind, then closed the piano lid gently. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face, but tonight, she had made a promise to a child who had shown her what true courage looked like, and somehow that made all the difference. The community center was packed. Word had spread about the benefit concert, partly due to Lynn's viral video from months before. People from all over the neighborhood had come to support the playground fund, but many were specifically hoping to hear the piano lady play again. Lynn peeked through the curtain that had been hung to create a makeshift backstage area. Her heart raced at the sight of the crowd. She hadn't performed before an audience this size in years, and the familiar anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. But then she thought of Lily, who had faced far greater challenges with remarkable courage. 3 days ago, Lily had been moved to intensive care. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, and the doctors were doing everything they could to stabilize her. Lynn had visited daily, sometimes just sitting beside the bed, holding the sleeping child's hand. Other times, when Lily was awake, Lynn would describe her progress on arranging My Sunshine song for the concert, watching the girl's face light up despite her obvious pain. "You'll record it for me, right?" Lily had asked yesterday, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Lynn had promised. "And as soon as you're better, I'll teach you how to play the arrangement yourself." They both knew it was a promise that might never be fulfilled, but the pretense gave them both comfort. "Nervous?" a voice asked, pulling Lynn from her thoughts. She turned to see Dr. Wei, her former professor, standing behind her. He had arrived that morning, accepting her invitation with a promptness that surprised her. Their initial meeting had been awkward, filled with unspoken words and painful memories. But as they had worked together on finalizing the arrangement of Lily's song throughout the day, the old tensions had gradually eased. "Terrified," Lynn admitted. Dr. Wei nodded understandingly. "You know, I still get nervous before every performance, even after 50 years of playing." "Really?" Lynn asked, finding this hard to believe. The Dr. Wei she remembered had always seemed so confident, so certain. "Absolutely. The day you stop feeling nervous is the day you stop caring about the music. He paused, studying her face. But this is different for you, isn't it? This isn't about proving anything to anyone. Lynn nodded, her throat tight. This is for Lily. And that makes all the difference. Dr. Wei placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've grown as a musician, Lynn. Not despite walking away from the conservatory, but because of the journey you've taken since then. Before Lynn could respond, Mr. Chen appeared, looking harried but excited. 5 minutes, Lynn, he said. You're our final performer. Lynn nodded, taking a deep breath. She glanced down at her simple black dress. Nothing like the elaborate gowns she'd once worn for performances, but perfect for tonight's purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Grace at the hospital. Lily is awake and asking about the concert. Her parents are going to hold up the phone so she can hear you play. We're all with you in spirit. Lynn showed the message to Dr. Wei, who read it with a sympathetic smile. Then you're not playing just for a crowd tonight, he said. You're playing for an audience of one, somehow. That thought calmed Lynn's nerves more than anything else could have. The current performer finished to enthusiastic applause, and Mr. Chen stepped onto the small stage to introduce the final act. And now, ladies and gentlemen, many of you have been waiting for this moment. It gives me great pleasure to present our own neighborhood pianist, Lynn, who will be performing a very special piece tonight. Lynn walked onto the stage, her legs steadier than she had expected. The community center piano had been tuned for the occasion, and someone had placed a small vase of sunflowers on top, Lily's favorite. The sight nearly undid her composure, but she gathered herself as she sat on the bench. Looking out at the audience, Lynn could see Rose in the front row, giving her an encouraging smile. Next to her was Grace from the hospital holding up a phone, the connection to Lily's hospital room. Several of the nurses Lynn had come to know were scattered throughout the audience, along with parents of some of the children from the music therapy program. Lynn leaned toward the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. Thank you all for coming tonight to support the Playground Fund, she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The piece I'm going to play is very special to me. It wasn't written by Chopin or Mozart or any of the great composers. It was written by a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who is currently in the hospital fighting a battle no child should have to face. A hush fell over the audience. Lily wrote this piece and called it My Sunshine Song. She said she wrote it for me, because music brought sunshine into her hospital room. But the truth is, Lily has been the sunshine in my life, teaching me about courage, joy, and the real reason we make music. Not for acclaim or achievement, but to connect, to express what words cannot say, to bring light into dark places. Lynn positioned her hands over the keys. With help from my former piano professor who is here tonight, I've arranged Lily's composition. Lily is listening from her hospital room right now. This is for you, Lily. The room was completely silent as Lynn began to play. The arrangement started simply with just Lily's original melody, sweet, unpolished, but undeniably heartfelt. Gradually, Lynn built upon it, adding harmonies and counter melodies that complemented the child's creation without overshadowing it. The piece grew in complexity and emotional depth, telling the story of a little girl who brought sunshine into a former pianist's shadowed life. Lynn played with a freedom she hadn't felt in years, perhaps had never truly felt before. There was no fear now, no worry about technical perfection or audience judgment. There was only the music, the connection, the message she wanted to send to a small hospital room where a brave child was listening. As the piece reached its climax, Lynn incorporated echoes of the Chopin she had played at the community center months ago, weaving them into Lily's melody to symbolize how their musical journeys had intertwined. Then the music gentled, returning to the simple, pure tune that Lily had created, ending with a soft, hopeful chord that lingered in the air. For a moment after the final note faded, there was complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Lynn saw that several people were wiping away tears, including Rose and Grace. Dr. Wei was applauding vigorously from the side of the stage, genuine admiration in his eyes, but Lynn was looking at the phone in Grace's hand. Did she hear? She mouthed. Grace nodded, holding up the phone so Lynn could see the screen. There was Lily, propped up in her hospital bed, a weak but radiant smile on her face, her parents on either side of her. The child raised a thin hand in a small wave, and Lynn felt tears spill down her cheeks as she waved back. Later, after the applause had died down and the crowd had begun to disperse, Lynn found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Parents from the hospital thanked her for her work with their children. Community members who had seen her viral video expressed their admiration for her playing. A woman who introduced herself as the director of a music therapy program handed Lynn her card, suggesting they talk about possibilities. Through it all, Lynn felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the path she had envisioned for herself as a young prodigy, but perhaps it was the path she was meant to find. Dr. Wei approached as the crowd thinned. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Not just the playing, which was beautiful, but the way you honored that child's creativity. You've found your voice as an artist, Lynn." "Thank you," she said, meaning it sincerely. "For everything. For pushing me when I was your student and for understanding who I am now." "And who is that?" he asked, curious. Lynn thought for a moment. "Someone who's still figuring it out. But I know music will be part of it, just on different terms than before." Dr. Wei nodded approvingly. "The conservatory's loss is these children's gain," he said. "Though if you ever want to come talk to my students about alternative musical careers, the door is open." Lynn smiled. "I'll think about it." Her phone rang. It was Grace. Lynn's heart skipped a beat as she answered, fearing bad news about Lily. "Lynn," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion, "the doctors are amazed. Lily's latest test results show improvement. It might be temporary, it might be a coincidence, but she heard the music," Lynn finished. "Yes, and she hasn't stopped smiling since. She's asking when you'll come teach her to play the arrangement." Lynn closed her eyes, overwhelming relief washing over her. "Tell her I'll be there tomorrow. First thing." After ending the call, Lynn shared the news with Rose and Dr. Wei, both of whom embraced her with genuine joy. As the three of them walked out of the community center into the cool evening air, Lynn felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. 6 months ago, she had been a former pianist hiding from her past, afraid to touch the keys that had once defined her existence. Now, because someone had asked her to play a basic tune, she had found her way back to music, not as a return to her old life, but as a journey to something new and meaningful. The next morning, Lynn sat beside Lily's hospital bed, a small electronic keyboard between them. The child's condition had indeed improved, though the doctors remained cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. "Show me how to play it just like you did," Lily said, her eyes bright with excitement despite her weakness. Lynn placed the child's fingers gently on the keys. "Let's start at the beginning," she said, "with your Sunshine melody." As they played the first notes together, Lynn reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. She didn't know what the future would hold, whether she would expand her work with the hospital's music therapy program, take Dr. Wei up on his offer to speak at the conservatory, or even, perhaps, perform occasionally in small venues where music was about connection rather than perfection. What she did know was that music had found its rightful place in her life again. Not as a burden of expectations, but as a gift to be shared, not as a measure of her worth, but as a language of healing and hope. And it had all started when she was told to play a basic tune, and had found the courage to let her heart speak through her fingers once again.